After being one strike away from a championship not once but twice, the Texas Rangers watched it slip away in Game 6 and then lost Game 7 of the 2011 World Series. Since then, Major League Baseball has changed dramatically. They've added replay review, the pitch clock, and in 2026, ABS is coming to the big leagues. Most of these rule changes were designed to speed up the game and get more calls right, but what if these rules had existed in 2011? I'm going to re-officiate every pitch of Game 6 using 2026 MLB Rules, enforcing the pitch clock, tracking pitcher disengagements, and allowing ABS challenges to see if those changes could actually flip the outcome. Could the Rangers win the 2011 World Series 15 years later? Let's start with how this is actually going to work. I went through the entire broadcast and kept a pitch clock for every single pitch. A reminder as to how the pitch clock works in 2026. Pitchers will have 15 seconds with the bases empty or 18 seconds with a runner on to start their pitching motion. Hitters must be in the box and alert to the pitcher with 8 seconds remaining on the clock. There is also a 30-second timer between hitters, and the punishment for violating any of the pitch clock rules is an automatic ball for a pitcher and an automatic strike for a hitter. Now, MLB's rulebook leaves a lot of room for interpretation, not just in the pitch clock rule, but all over the place. And since Gary Cederstrom doesn't know what a pitch clock is yet, that discretion falls onto me. Now, due to the limitations presented by me only having access to what they show me on the broadcast, I had to set some additional ground rules. First, players are innocent until proven guilty. There are many points throughout the broadcast where we are watching a replay, or talking to Ken Rosenthal, or watching a gecko go yard, all the while the pitch clock is expiring in the corner. Since we don't see what's going on the field, I don't know whether it was the batter or the pitcher who wasn't ready, or maybe it could have been an umpire stoppage or any other timeout. Because of this limitation, unless I see the violation on screen, it doesn't count. This is especially prevalent in the 30-second timer between batters. For instance, after the David Freese game-tying triple in the 9th, there was understandably nearly a minute-long break before the next batter came to the plate while we watched the replays and got everyone's reaction. Ground rule number 2. There can only be one pitch clock violation per pitch. There are many instances in which the batter is not ready at the 8-second mark, and also the pitcher doesn't start his windup by 0. In this situation, the batter will be charged for the violation. Not only does it happen first, which would result in the umpire stopping play to call it, but also the majority of the time, the batter's violation causes the pitcher's violation, since the pitcher can't be set when the batter isn't in the box. Ground rule number 3. Hitter timeouts will be granted on the first violation. Since in 2026, every hitter has one timeout available to use, and in this game, the hitters obviously don't know they're under the pitch clock, I will use their timeout for them to prevent their first pitch clock violation. So every time I call a pitch clock violation on a hitter, just know he had already used his timeout, either calling it himself or me calling it for him. I have one more ground rule, but we'll cover that when we get to it. Now that I've laid out how I'm going to call these violations, let me show you how this actually looked when going through the game. No inning better exemplifies the change in baseball over the last 15 years than the bottom of the 4th. The bottom of the 4th begins with Lance Berkman hitting a ground ball to first and is called safe due to Colby Lewis missing the base by literal inches. Luckily, in 2023, MLB increased the base size from 15 to 18 inches, which, if you ask me, is enough for Lewis to just get a piece of. The next batter, Lewis commits a pitch clock violation in a 3-0 count to Matt Holliday, and David Freese is called for a pitch clock violation the batter after that. Freese's at-bat ends with what looks like is going to be a ground ball double play, but is broken up by a Matt Holliday hook slide, which was banned in 2016. In the next at-bat, Colby Lewis fakes a pickoff to third, then turns to first, a move made illegal in 2013. After a legal pickoff move, Lewis does the illegal one again, which is also his third disengagement without recording an out. The next two batters, Yadier Molina and Nick Punto, commit 6 pitch clock violations between them, and Lewis commits one more. Finally, right before striking out Punto to end the inning, Lewis disengages with the mound for the 3rd time in the at-bat for a grand total of 15 rule violations in this half inning alone. 8 violations by the Cardinals, 6 by the Rangers, and I suppose the last one is given to the grounds crew for using the incorrect bases. But clearly not all violations are created equal, so just counting them up and awarding the winner of the game to who made fewer doesn't make any sense. What we need to find are the violations that mattered most for the result of the game. In the bottom of the 10th inning, with the Cardinals down to their last strike, Lance Berkman would single in the game-tying run to send the game to the 11th. But if this game were re-officiated today, Berkman would have been called for a pitch clock violation for not being ready at 8 seconds prior to the 1-2 pitch. Berkman would have been penalized a strike and struck out to end the game. Rangers win. So that should be the end of the video, right? If Berkman struck out in this situation, the game never would have gotten tied, and David Freese wouldn't have a chance to walk it off in the 11th. Well, it's not actually fair to enforce it this way either. You can't just cherry pick the biggest moment in the game and only enforce consequences here. You'd have to go all the way back to the first inning and start from the time Jaime Garcia commits the first pitch clock violation of the game. Garcia winds up throwing a ball anyway, so the violation didn't matter, right? Well, it still does, because the violation would have been called prior to the pitch. So when his next actual pitch is a ball, the count would be 3-1 instead of 2-1. Very quickly we'll find ourselves where we'd have to simulate pitches and even at-bats that didn't actually take place, and at that point I might as well just replay this game on OOTP. I think I have a better idea. This is a win probability graph. You may have seen one before on the ESPN app or tweeted out when a team blows a big lead. The way it works is very simple. It takes the score, inning, and situation into account and searches history to find games where this exact situation has happened and determines how often a team wins from that point on. This is GregStoll.com's baseball win expectancy finder. Using this, we can punch in our Lance Berkman at bat. There have been 23 games in baseball history where in the bottom of the 10th inning, the visiting team led by 1 with 2 on and 2 out and a 2-2 count on the batter. In 18 of those games, the visiting team went on to win the game, giving them a 78% win expectancy. When Lance Berkman singles in the tying run and puts runners at first and third, he flips the win expectancy to 68% for the home team. That means that this event and Lance Berkman himself are credited with 46% win probability added. This is how we're going to evaluate the effect that the 2026 MLB rules would have had on this game. Although the consequences on the field are going to stand, every event that is changed by a 2026 rule will be calculated to find its win probability added. So in our hypothetical where Berkman strikes out on a pitch clock violation on the 1-2 pitch, the Rangers' 86% win probability jumps to 100. So the game will still play on, but that event will be recorded as a plus 14 win probability added for the Rangers. Now we just have to do this for every other rule violation the rest of the game. Here are all 74 2026 rule violations in Game 6 of the 2011 World Series. They are organized horizontally by inning and vertically by win probability added. Here's the 15 violations of the bottom of the 4th, the most of any half inning. Surprisingly, the 8th inning had no violations at all. Berkman's pitch clock violation that would have ended the game is here, the 3rd biggest win probability swing of the entire game. Here's that 4th inning illegal slide by Matt Holliday. First and third with 1 out gave the Cardinals a 53.5% win probability. If we enforce the 2026 slide rules, the runner on first would be called out as well, resulting in the Cardinals' win probability dropping all the way to 43.1%. Unsurprisingly, about 3/4 of the total violations are pitch clock violations, 33 being assessed to the pitcher and 23 being assessed to the hitter. Remember that hitter number would be over double without them being granted a timeout on the first violation per at-bat. There are 5 calls overturned by the automated ball strike system, 3 times the pitchers took too many disengagements, and the Rangers took 3 too many mound visits. And finally, there are 7 more miscellaneous violations. For instance, maybe you notice this little guy, who's outside the boundaries of the chart. This isn't a mistake. There was actually a rule violation that happened before the game even started, and resulted in the Rangers losing 8% win probability before a pitch was even thrown. In 2011, the Rangers won 96 games, winning the West, while the Cardinals were a wildcard team with 90 wins. But it's Game 6. Why is the team with the inferior record hosting Game 6 of the World Series? Well, that's because from 2003 to 2016, the All-Star Game determined home field advantage for the World Series, not team record. Across baseball history, home teams have won about 54% of all games played, meaning if the 2026 World Series hosting rules applied to Game 6, the Rangers' win probability would go from being 46% before the game to 54%. The other miscellaneous violations are the illegal pickoff moves from Colby Lewis, the bigger bases fiasco, and Matt Holliday's slide is here too. There was actually another slide I deemed against the rules from Michael Young, but if you think this is a little soft, it didn't end up mattering because the runner was out at first anyway, resulting in the win probability remaining unchanged and was the least impactful rule violation of all 74. The final miscellaneous incident is actually the second most impactful play of the entire game. After Colby Lewis loads the bases recording just 1 out in the 6th inning, Ron Washington goes to his bullpen to bring out Alexi Ogando. Ogando walks Yadier Molina, and despite Matt Holliday being picked off third in the process, walks Nick Punto as well. Washington decides to go back to the bullpen, but for us, this is a problem. Ogando has only faced 2 batters, violating the 3 batter minimum rule introduced in 2020. But how do we actually officiate this? If this happened today, the head umpire just wouldn't allow the Rangers to change pitchers. Calling it a pitch clock violation doesn't feel near severe enough of a punishment, so maybe call it a balk? I actually think the best thing to do is to force an intentional walk. This would give Ogando a 3rd batter faced and allow Washington to change pitchers at the cost of the Cardinals getting a run while keeping the bases loaded. Since we aren't actually taking the consequences for the violations, it wouldn't skip John Jay's at bat and the rest of the game would continue as normal. Enforcing it this way causes the St. Louis win probability to jump from 63.7 to 79.1. Now let's talk about ABS. On the surface, you may think just 5 overturned calls sounds low, and that brings us back to our ground rules. I think it's unrepresentative of how ABS is actually going to work if I just overturn every incorrect call in the game. For one, there is no strike zone overlay on the broadcast, and while they do have the Fox Track strike zone, that only comes up on a few select pitches. But more importantly, the way ABS is being implemented in 2026 is a challenge system. It's not just an automated strike zone the entire game. Either the catcher, pitcher, or batter must challenge a pitch for it to be reviewed. So for me to overturn a call using the ABS rule for this game, not only do I need to be confident the call was incorrect, but I also need to be confident the team would risk potentially losing their challenge to review it. So for example, this breaking ball to Josh Hamilton in the 3rd inning sure looks outside to me, and Josh Hamilton certainly thinks so. But given how early it is in the game and no runners being on base, and the fact that it just may have clipped the zone, I don't think Hamilton would risk losing one of only 2 Ranger challenges so early. However, the next batter, Adrian Beltre, takes this pitch that's called a strike that Fox Track shows is clearly inside. Since we have proof the call was wrong and Beltre reacts like he knows it's a ball, this time I am going to use a Ranger challenge to get this call overturned. Surprisingly, despite not resulting in a walk, the count being 3-1 instead of 2-2 ends up in a massive increase in the Rangers' win percentage. It's the 4th biggest WPA of the entire game. How about these 2 points? In the bottom of the 6th on an 0-2 count Albert Pujols, Colby Lewis sure thinks he has the strikeout, and according to Fox Tracks, he's right. Using the Rangers challenge would result in Pujols striking out, and the Rangers' win percentage goes up by about 3%. But since we can't actually take the outcome of the overturned call, play resumes, and on the next pitch, Pujols is rung up on a pitch that he believes isn't close. And again, Fox Tracks agrees. So challenging and overturning this call would have resulted in a 2-2 count, and 4.1 win probability added for St. Louis. These account for all 74 rule violations. There were some new rules that didn't show up in this game that I thought would have. For instance, there were no calls in the field that would have been overturned by replay review. I tried to make a case that Matt Holliday was actually safe when he got picked off third, even going so far as to try to convince myself that with bigger bases, maybe he'd have gotten in there. But no, I'm pretty sure Holliday is destined to be out here and there's nothing I can do about it. There's also no shift violations and no one plowed over a catcher. There is one major rule change that I haven't mentioned all video. In 2022, the National League officially adopted the designated hitter, and there's a lot of pitcher hitting in this game, so why isn't it included? Well, for one, technically it's not against the rules for a manager to still have his pitcher hit. The only manager doing this in 2025 is Dave Roberts with Shohei Ohtani, but if Craig Counsell wanted Matt Boyd to hit in the lineup, that's not against the rules. Secondly, it actually doesn't change this experiment at all because the tool we're using to measure the impact of these rule violations, win probability added, doesn't actually take into account who's batting. Whether it's Colby Lewis or Mitch Moreland who's batting with first and second and nobody out, WPA views the situation as equal. I tried to think of ways I could have implemented the universal DH, but again we get into the situation where I'd have to simulate at bats that didn't actually happen. I still haven't mentioned this point, which is the single biggest win probability swing of the entire game. In the bottom of the sixth, with first and second in a 3-2 count, the Cardinals currently have a 55.5 win probability despite trailing by 1. Before the payoff pitch, David Freese is not attentive when the pitch clock hits 8 seconds. Since he used his timeout earlier in the at-bat, Freese would be penalized with a pitch clock violation and would strike out for the second out. This would drop the Cardinals' win percentage all the way down to 39.5. This made even worse by the fact that in the actual game, Freese would walk on this pitch, and the Cardinals' win probability with the bases loaded would have been 60%. So with all 74 rule violations in mind, does the result of the game actually change? Well, according to win probability added, the answer is yeah. The Rangers' total win probability added was 134.3%, compared to St. Louis adding 98%, the difference of which results in a 36.3% advantage in favor of Texas. And it wasn't if the Rangers were just better at avoiding violation than the Cardinals. Of the 74 overturned plays, 37 benefited Texas and 37 benefited St. Louis. However, 4 of the 5 most impactful violations favored the Rangers. The Rangers' MVP of Game 6 may just have to be Matt Holliday, whose illegal slide plus 3 pitch clock violations resulted in a 30.3% win probability added for Texas. The Rangers win in spite of their starting pitcher Colby Lewis, whose 11 violations are by far the most of any individual player, and resulted in a 29.4% WPA increase for the Cardinals. Holliday, along with David Freese, Lance Berkman, Yadier Molina, and Fernando Salas, all contributed double-digit win probability added to Texas. If you don't trust win probability added, I also tracked the expected run value change of all 74 violations. The biggest difference between ERV and WPA is the status of the game. Unlike WPA, ERV does not care about the inning or score. It also doesn't care about who's home or away or who's batting. So do the Rangers win the game if we use expected run value? The Rangers' total ERV added through 74 violations is 7.8 runs, while the Cardinals received 7.2 runs. So again, Texas just edges out St. Louis. And if you're still not convinced, I re-simulated the whole game on Out of the Park Baseball using 2025 rules, and Texas came out on top there as well, thanks to a Josh Hamilton 4th inning grand slam. So yeah, after all this, the Rangers would have taken it. You know, if we counted all the violations but didn't take the consequences, and also none of the players or coaches knew about the rules, but hey, I think Rangers fans in 2011 would take it. This moment is probably still burned into their memory. Funny enough, the very final rule violation of this game, this one all the way down here that barely makes a dent in the probability change, it's the bottom of the 11th, and on the 3-0 pitch, Mark Lowe fails to start his delivery before the pitch clock expires. That would have been a pitch clock violation and David Freese would have walked. It's almost like it's one last effort to prevent this moment from happening. But remember, we can't cherry pick when we enforce the consequences, so I guess play on.
Freese hits it in the air to center. We will see you